Okay, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Alta. I'm from Rhodes University in South Africa. And then I am co-presenting this session with Zander from the Norwegian Institute for Nature Research, and then with Beatrice Bellon from the CNS. And we also have Tanya and David Gibson, and Tanya Birch here, who are going to be TAing the session. So this session is about applications and benefits of Earth Engine apps in practice. This morning there was some mention of that we were going to be talking about like how to create Earth Engine apps and best practices for creating those for other people. That's not what we're going to be doing. So if you are here to learn about like how to create Earth Engine apps, maybe pick one of the other sessions. This session is specifically for people who may want to use Earth Engine apps. You may have heard quite a bit about like Earth Engine apps in other sessions, and maybe you want to like find out like how can I get my hands on some of these apps, like what can I actually do with them, like what are they about. So this session is more for those kind of people. So if you're happy to be here for that, then welcome. Okay, so how it's going to work, I'm going to give you a very quick introduction to kind of Earth Engine apps and what we're going to be talking about. And then I'm going to hand over to Zander and Beatrice to talk you through some examples of these apps. And then we're going to have open the floor a little bit to discussion and questions. And we'd like to give you some time to actually like explore some of these apps on your own as well towards the end of the session. All right, so, I mean, most of you know this already, but just to start us off on a very introductory note, what do we talk about when we talk about Earth Engine apps? So Earth Engine apps, this is the formal definition, are dynamic shareable user interfaces for Earth Engine analyses. So these are kind of user interfaces that were built on top of analyses and maps that were created by researchers and developers to help in most cases, to help other people to interact with those data sets and to kind of make them more accessible to a broader audience. So to use apps, they're shared with a URL, so you don't need to know code. That's the point, I guess. Oh, well, that's one of the points. You don't have to have an Earth Engine account, so you don't have to have be signed up to Earth Engine. And in most cases, you also don't need to be a technical expert it depends a little bit. Like some of the apps do require you to know, obviously, like a little bit of the subject area. But for most of the apps that are available and that we're going to be talking about, it does not require you to be a technical expert in that field as well. And so also maybe just to say that there are kind of different ways to create Earth Engine apps. One way is in the Earth Engine code editor, but then you can also create more fancy apps with the Google Maps API. But like I said, we're not talking about creating the apps here, we're talking about using them. So where can you find these apps? So I think, and please, people in the room who know more than me about this, I think like a very common place to find apps at the moment is actually like people share them mostly on their own websites or in papers or, like on their platforms. But there are like a couple of places where you can also look for apps. So the Earth Engine app page has some curated examples that you can explore. So those are like quite fancy, all singing, all dancing kind of app examples. And then there's also a kind of up-to-date repository, a very comprehensive repository of Earth Engine apps that is hosted by Philip Gartner called Awesome Earth Engine Apps, and you can get that link from the website. And that's just a kind of a list of all the currently available Earth Engine apps. It can, however, be quite difficult to find the app that you need. If you are someone who's like, oh, I wonder if there's an app for that, it might be difficult to actually find that. in the kind of the curated examples is quite limited. The repository is there's quite a bit of noise there because people also just create apps randomly for their own kind of uses. So it's not always easy to find that. So to help you in this session and maybe like a seed for something going forward, we being Zander, has created like a little spreadsheet where we've curated a number of apps that we know about and that we think like a few kind of good examples of apps, and classified them in terms of various kind of elements like the application purpose, the scientific domain in which they mostly use, the difficult level in kind of coding the app, and then also the difficult level in using the app. So when we get a chance to like play with apps a little bit later on, then the idea is that you could maybe use this matrix to help you know a little bit more like what apps you might want to use. But this is just kind of a seed for you to manage the apps a little bit more. Okay, and then what we would like most of the session to talk about is what people actually use these apps for. So we've kind of categorized it into 3 different categories of applications, and these overlap to a great degree as well. And in a second, I'm going to hand over to Zander and Beatrice to walk you through those applications in a little bit more detail, so it will also be clarified. So the first kind of category is apps that help you to explore data sets. So an example of that would be the dynamic world dataset that, like obviously if you're a developer or you're an analyst, you can go into the code editor and you can do all sorts of fancy analysis. But if you just want to kind of understand like what are some of the patterns from dynamic world, then you can go to the app and kind of explore for your region what's happening. What does the dynamic world say for your region or for a specific place in the world? What's happening there? So that would be there's other examples of that as well, like Global Forest Watch, where you can use the apps to kind of get a sense of what's going on in the data set. A second category of application is where people have created apps to actually do a little bit of analysis. And so like even these data exploration apps could sometimes like overlap with this category as well. But this is where you might even sometimes have your own data. Beatrice is going to talk about an example of that, and upload your data and then, like do a little bit of analysis of your data in the app. And so it's just kind of a way to make remote sensing analysis a little bit more accessible, or like have a different kind of or a sort of a base application or analysis that you can do some additional analysis for in your particular area. So these are apps where that will help people do analysis. And then a third sort of application or a third category of app are apps that are made for kind of advocacy and more sort of knowledge dissemination. And again, they kind of overlap with the previous 2 categories as well. But an example of that would be like if you write a paper and you have some sort of an analysis and you want to make that analysis like more accessible to other people outside of your kind of academic audience, or if talking about something like Land Trend at the Time series animator, where you can also use that for kind of advocacy to say like, oh, look at these kind of changes over time, and use that for advocacy for kind of climate action, for example. Okay, so I am now going to hand over to Zander to talk you through the first one of these examples, for you to get a little bit more of a sense of what that actually looked like.
Yeah, thanks, Alta. So yeah, it's just the idea is to give you a bit of a taster of what an app in each of these categories can look like, and you can explore similar apps later on in your own time. But the first one I'll present is this Urban Nature Atlas. So this is in the category of exploring data sets, and the potential users for this could be your colleagues at your research institute or NGO, fellow scientists. Public authorities or just the general public, people who just want to interrogate some data and have a look at what it looks like on a map, and if there's a time component to it, the spatial extent, etc. And it's a very basic app in terms of the user experience. There's no technical prerequisites that are required to use the app. Some of the unique aspects in this particular app I'll point out is that it has 2 language translations, and it has a basic spatial prioritization tool. But I'll quickly open it just to give you a feel. So it comes up with this introduction page where you can select your language. Unless there are any Norwegians here, I'll choose English. But maybe a first thing to point out with this app is that there's various base layers you can include in apps and style them. And it's very flexible in terms of the colors you can use to style the roads, the water, the different elements in the Google Maps base layer. And then this is probably something many of you are very familiar with, this sort of menu structure where you have drop-down menus. They can be a nested hierarchy, and you can then visualize these layers on the map. And in this case, if I choose terrain, slope, and I want to allow the user to compare it with another app, you can use this slider widget from side to side to compare how this looks, for example, with tree crown height. And all of this is focused on Oslo city, but it could be of any spatial extent that you're interested in. So maybe I'll stop there. It's just a taster of what this sort of app category could look like. And the dynamic world is another good example of this, which I didn't choose to present because it'll be presented in other sessions. Now I'll hand over to Beatrice for the next category.
Thank you. Okay, so I'm going to present just one example of a data analysis tool that we've developed. So it's the Coexist Land app. This is a species occurrence modeling tool that can be used by conservation practitioners, researchers, scientists, students, also if they want to learn about this kind of tool. And it's used basically to estimate the probability of a species, so animal species, being present in a landscape. So this is a more technical type of app where you need to have some input data. So you can have your own data uploaded into the app and do some analysis with it, and then get some outcomes from the app. And but that's the only requirement. But then it's also good if you have some knowledge, a little knowledge in ecology, maybe species occurrence modeling, so that will help to interpret the results. It's not just exploring, but analyzing the data. So this data, as I said, needs some input data to be fed into the app. So here, typically we would use camera trap data, so or any type of geolocalized data on the presence of species. So maybe some of you have this kind of data and want to test it afterwards. Otherwise, there's some great platforms like the Wildlife Insights platform that already has a lot of data sets available that you can also download. And so I'm not going to open the app right now because it could take a little time to run. I'm just going to show you how so this is how it looks. And it would work like it's pretty straightforward. You just have to select a data set. We just added some, just if you want to run demos with the data sets that we included. But otherwise, you would input your data set and then fill in different parameters, like, for example, the time period of analysis you want to work on, some environmental predictors to be able to run the model to be able to predict the presence of species in your landscape. And the kind of output that you can get with this app would be these two type of maps. So if you just run the model for one species of interest, for example, an elephant, you'll get the probability of occurrence of that species in for the whole landscape. And if you select a group of species that you're interested in, then you will get the number of species estimate for your landscape. So just an example, there's a lot of good examples that we added into the spreadsheet on data analysis apps. And back to Zander.
So the last category, this advocacy knowledge dissemination category, I'm going to sneak in 2 apps here, because the first one is this Land Trend R time series animator. So this is a really useful app to get a feeling for the change in a landscape over the last 3-4 decades using the Landsat satellite data. And the potential users of this are people like journalists. Publishing GIF animations on websites can be quite a visually stimulating means of telling a story. The general public, of course, and also scientists who want to just get a feel for what's happening in their study area. And again, this requires very basic skills from the user of the app. And some of the unique aspects of this app are that it allows you to export data, in this case a GIF, and it also allows the user to draw geometries, which is another capability of these Earth Engine apps. So if I quickly open this one, it comes up with this interface where you can select a date range. I'll just select from 2001 to 2021. You can select the months of the year. So you might want to select the growing season in your area of interest, and various band combinations to visualize the imagery. And you can also toggle the frames per second that the animation is going to play in. And if I zoom into an area, I at least know where there's been change from where I live, Oslo municipality, and I zoom into the Gardermoen International Airport. And now I want to define a bounding box for the animation. You click on the map and you can digitize this polygon, and then I've essentially put the cake in the oven, and now it's fetching the Landsat tiles and stitching them together. So while that cake is baking, I'm going to switch to the second example, which is this is Green Apartheid app. So this was an app I produced in association with a paper I did on the spatial inequality of green space in cities or in urban areas in South Africa, and how it sort of traces this legacy of apartheid in our country. And this sort of app is very useful for enhancing the impact of your science by allowing users to zoom in to different areas. Often in a publication, you can only put a map of a certain extent, and you can't allow the users to interact with the data. So I found it to be very powerful, and I got a lot of traction from journalists or members of the public who zoomed into their city and interacted with the data and gained insights like that. Some of the unique aspects of this are that I've included some on-change zoom events. So with apps, when you zoom in and out, you can trigger different things to happen, which I'll show you now. I've also included the split screen and swipe screen widget. So I'll open this app. And the app opens up on Cape Town, which is in the south of South Africa, and has these 3 panels. The one on the left showing distribution of race by census tract, the center one showing income, and the one on the right, share of the greenery. So in this app, I allow users to zoom to different cities. So it's sort of they can scroll and zoom manually on the app themselves, but they can also use this shortcut. If the user zooms in, they can update the charts for the area of extent that you're visualizing in the map. And then they can toggle to swipe between maps, which is sort of a different form of comparison to where they sit side by side. At the request of a journalist, I also added this ability to hide the legends and the graphs, because they literally took a screenshot of this and published it in their article. And if the user zooms in a bit further, I use this on-change zoom event with the race category on the left. I turn it into this sort of point density map, where each point represents 10 citizens of that race. So just a bit of a different way of visualizing the data. So that was an example of an app used in association with a scientific publication can be used for advocacy. If I go back to our oven, and it looks like our cake has come out. So this is the time lapse of Gardermoen, and I realize now that it was actually built mostly in the 90s, so I excluded the time. But you can see the principle. This is the time lapse of Landsat imagery. There's some change going on, but I should have shifted the time frame back a bit. But eventually, at the end, you can right-click on this, click Save Image As, and download it to your desktop as a GIF. And there's also a link to, this is Justin Broughton's work, where you can upload this to another app built in R, where you can change different parameters and add, make the animation look a bit more interesting. So that brings us to the discussion.
Okay, so I think we're going to just take a few minutes, we can take more than a few minutes, to open it up for questions and kind of comments from the floor. Also less than a few minutes. Okay, yes. Yeah, so on this we should probably give you a microphone.
Thanks. So on the species occurrence one, how did you account for people who would input their data in formats that didn't play nice with the your methodology?
Sorry, I didn't understand.
I can repeat the question. It's asked. What's your name?
Gabe.
Asked if you, how did you account for people putting in data that is not in the right format for your app?
So there's a link in the app, in the interface, with some technical documentation where it explains how to prepare the data for upload, so in the right format, and how to structure. Basically, it's a CSV file with some basic columns, and you can adapt it easily from the typical formats people acquire this kind of data to that format.
Cool, thanks. And can you put in like movement data of animals, or does it have to be camera trap, like occurrence information?
I think we've never tested it with movement data, but I think there's a way of taking out data points from the movement data, so you will still be able to use it.
Cool, thanks.
Anyone else?
So that's a great job, guys. Kudos. I would like to find out if these apps are available for the public to use. And where can we access it?
Oh, okay. I think, can I go back to the first slide? So that also, why am I doing it like this? It's like I never present at all. We spoke about this at the beginning of the presentation, but it's good to repeat it. So most people share these apps, like on their websites or in their papers or, on their own platforms. But there are two places. So if you go to the Earth Engine apps catalog, there's some examples of where, like good examples of apps have been curated. And then there's this repository that's been put together by Philip Gartner, where there's an up-to-date list of all the kind of, I think, all the Earth Engine apps available, but it's not kind of categorized. So for the purposes of this session, we've actually put together a sort of a lookup matrix of apps, where all the apps that we've spoken about here today are in this matrix, and a few other ones as well. But it's not comprehensive, but the idea is to just categorize them a little bit more so that it's easier for people to, at least for you, for people in this room, to find some of the apps that would be relevant to them. But these are not all the ones that are out there. It can be quite, oopsie. It can be quite hard to
Try this one.
Okay. To find and navigate them. And then just to your other question, your first question, they are freely available. Like when you publish an app, the point is to put it out there. And you don't need an Earth Engine account or anything like that. You can just, it's just a link that you access and then you have access to the app.
And all these links are in the slide deck. So if you access that through the Geo for Good agenda, you can get these links. But yeah.
This app, are they global? Can you use it for a global study, or is just generated to a specific area?
It depends on the app. Some of them are limited to a specific area, but many of them are have a global extent, or at least an extent that's defined by the data that's used. So the Landsat app I showed that makes that time lapse is globally available. You can click anywhere in the world and get that time lapse.
Okay, all right. Thank you so much.
Okay. Anyone else?
What have been some challenges that you've experienced developing the apps in the JavaScript environment? Like, are there certain functionalities you wish you could have that you don't?
Yeah, that's a good question. I can give my opinion. I think it's an amazing platform for researchers like myself who are not trained web developers. I guess the step up from this would be to generate an app which maybe uses Google Earth Engine at the back end, but uses something like App Engine, which is another Google service, to deploy the app, and you can customize the front end in terms of the widgets, the labels, the functionality of the app. But for me as a researcher, these are very useful for the purposes we've mentioned here. Sometimes I reach the limits of the functionality with things like being able to style buttons or things in very specific ways that the current parameters do not allow. But there are some workarounds to that. But yeah, so that's maybe one of the challenges I've had. Maybe sometimes if you're doing things that require on-the-fly computation, you have to be careful with trying to communicate to the user of the app, so that they don't try and do whatever your app is doing, try and do it on a scale that reaches a computational limit and then just throws an error in the app. So you got to be careful. You sort of need to limit the user to some extent so that it still functions. That's been another challenge for me. I don't know if you have any others to add. Yeah.
Right. Any other questions? Okay, so what our idea was for the rest of the session is to actually give people some time to play with apps. So you can play with any of the apps that we mentioned, or if you want to, like use this matrix to find something that's more suitable to, to your context and your purposes, then you can do that. The link, there's a link to the presentation on the website, and then there's another link that also links to this matrix, so you can access it that way, or you can just type in this link, which is the bit.ly link with Earth Engine lookup, and you should also get to the same place. And then, yeah, I think just take some time to explore these apps. We'll be kind of walking around. I think if you want to use the species occurrence one, then Beatrice is your person. And I know the least of us all here, so maybe try and avoid me. But yeah, just raise your hands if you have any questions, and yeah, take some time to kind of play a little bit. I hope that's okay.
And just to add maybe that although we didn't go into the technical side of actually coding an app or deploying an app, if you have questions about that, you're welcome to ask, and we can point you. The code editor has some really great examples of user interface code that you can just click on and run and play around with. So we can also point you to that if you want.
I had a question on that, but can you make Thanks. Sorry. Can you make these apps with Python as well as using
As
the
far as
JavaScript?
I know, it's not possible, but I don't know, David, you want to?
Not as easily as you can with a code editor, but you can write Earth Engine code in Python, and if you follow the instructions on writing an App Engine app, you can run that Python under App Engine. We have a few examples on the Earth Engine public website to get you started, but yeah, it's a bit more of a software engineer and less of a, in the code editor IDE process to do it.
Cool. Thanks.
Yeah.